Well, welcome to Between Sundays. I'm Tyler, and if my great-great-grandfather, Jephthah Troyer, could see me now, today we're talking about why genealogies are not boring and why it should matter to you. But before we look back and remember who Perez's dad was, now that they've blessed all the families of Earth, let's welcome in our favorite ancestor co-host, Marin and Barry. Good day, guys.
Good day.
Good day.
Guys, I had to do quite a bit of digging to find out the name of my great-great-grandfather.
You didn't already know?
How did you just pull that out so quick?
I didn't. I texted my dad during church, and I was like, what's the name of your great-grandfather? And he had to ask other people.
Wow.
Yeah, Jephthah Troyer.
Have you guys done...
Troyer, Mennonite.
Probably Amish.
Okay, I was going to say, because Jephthah.
Yeah.
That
guy definitely had a chin beard. Definitely.
Yeah, it's pretty close to Amish if he wasn't full-blown Amish.
Wow.
Oh, man, guys, took a week off. Happy Easter, everybody.
Yeah.
He is risen.
He's still risen.
Indeed.
Yep.
Yeah.
What's new? What's going on? How are you guys doing?
You always
Good.
have new stuff.
Yeah,
and
what's your new stuff?
You have a good new
We
thing.
do have a good new thing. We adopted another pig, a little tiny guy. We don't know how old he is. Basically, we saw
split hooves.
Yep, you got there. People started posting or tagging us in this post from Indie Animal Control. They had found a little pig like wandering the streets of Indianapolis. It had been bitten by a dog.
Aww.
And they're not set up for pigs at all. They're there for dogs and cats, and so people started tagging us, and it was apparent Oinking Acres wasn't in the space to take him, and so we just decided, let's just do it. Let's make it happen. We've got this other pen that we were set up maybe for some goats later this year or something, and so we just went down to Indie Animal Control and took home this little guy, and we named him Ziggy, and I think he was definitely raised in a house because he's very cuddly, like compared to other pigs, and will get up in your lap and is super friendly, doesn't make I don't think he interacted with other pigs much. So
you think he was raised in a house. How do you think he feels now that he's in a barn?
Well, I don't know that he loves it. Well, first of all, he's super bored because he's in this pen separate from all the other pigs.
Oh, you're keeping him separate?
Yeah, just because
Why do you think he was raised in a house?
Well, his behavior is so different than other piggies, and I don't think he knows how to be a pig. He doesn't make the noises that they do, and he's super
You're gonna
intrigued
bring that
by
boy in the
them.
house.
Well, if it wasn't for the fact that he is obsessed with Puddles, the pig, and she's really interested in him. They're
They can
just
have play dates.
They just stare at each other through the fence for hours at a time. They sleep next to each other on other sides of the fence. It's really cute. So I think he's destined to be with the other piggies. So,
and we don't know how old he is.
No, we're taking him to the vet. Liv's taking him to Purdue to get neutered this week, and they'll do an evaluation and be able to tell us a lot more closely how old he is, because he's teeny, but he could just be a baby, or maybe he's just a real small guy. So we'll see.
All right.
Anyway, he's really cute. We named him Ziggy. Ziggy the piggy.
Yeah, you guys had him for a couple days or something before you came up with the name.
Yeah, we had to get to know him first. Got to know his personality, and he's a Ziggy. He just is.
Yeah.
Once that name came out, it was that's probably the one.
It's him.
How long will it take to incorporate him with the rest of the
herd?
Is it a herd?
A herd, yeah. We've let him out a couple times to kind of mingle outside, but what ends up happening inevitably is the big bully pigs like Beans and Cornbread, the really intimidating guys, they come up to him and it's all dominance, and they literally ganged up on him, and we're swiping their heads at him, and it's all chomping their mouths. Everybody does this just to kind of show him who's boss, and he's terrified. And then Cleo is so eager to play with him, and I'm like, Cleo, over my dead body, will you scare this little piglet? Because he doesn't know you want to play. He thinks he got bit by a dog, right? He's got trauma, so I had to bop Cleo and give her some talking to, because she was out there chasing him. And anyway, so he's ready to just figure out being in a herd and find his place. And
I say you put him in the house and put Cleo in his pen.
She would love nothing more than to be out there with the pigs.
Yeah.
She loves she thinks she's
perfect
a pig.
fit.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's new. It's spring on the farm. There's a million projects, but it's kind of, I was out changing the blades on my mower and changing the oil and doing all the spring chores, and for the first time in a bit, I was like, this feels good. I like being outside. I like having a reason to be kind of active on the farm. So that's good.
Yeah. Marin, what's new with you?
Not much. Spring is sprung.
Yeah.
Not much. Not much. We're
You're
talking
still in the-
landscaping around my house. We're just trying to get things freshened up for summer.
Did you have a New Year's resolution or anything that was like, I'm going to read so much. I'm going to read 20 books this year.
As I said, every update will probably be about school, and I'm
Yeah. 'Cause
trying
you just showed
not
us-
to make it about school.
You just showed us a video of you sitting out in the sun in your yard,
Yeah.
but you were reading what looked
Yes.
like a very serious book.
It's a very serious book.
Yeah.
All my books are so very serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I do these days. I read and I write and I read and I write and then I read some more and then I write about it.
Do you like it yet?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
That's great.
I really do. I love what I'm learning. It's like people who love working out. Like, it is exhausting and it
Right.
requires a lot of
Yeah, let me tell you.
exertion. But you do it for a reason. You do
Uh-huh.
it because you love it, or you do it
Yeah.
because of what you gain from it. I feel like right now, this first, semester in school feels a lot like that.
Yeah.
It is challenging. It is exhausting, and yet I love it. I'm
Right.
digging in, and
And it's
good.
building muscles, like
Absolutely.
different muscles. Yeah, just like
Totally.
working out.
Yep.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Honestly, I need to spend more time asking you about what you're learning because we haven't really talked
No.
about that much. But I'm very curious, and I'm actually kind of jealous because it's
Yeah.
fun.
We'll do that another time, but
Obviously, obviously. What about you, Tyler? What's
yeah, so I've got a little bit of a worry here.
new? Oh,
This morning, we're recording this on a Monday. So this morning, we asked Lane, 5 years old, hey, can you go feed the dog? So he knows what to do. He goes out and scoops out some food, brings it, put it in her bowl, and he runs into my room. He's like, Dad. I'm like, hang on, I got to do this thing. He's like, Dad. I'm like, hang on. Lou's yelling at me or whatever, and finally I'm like, all right, what? And he's like, there's a mouse in Elsie's bag of food.
oh no! Alive?
Yeah.
Uh-uh.
So he scooped food and a mouse jumped out of his cup, like in the bag.
no.
So I walked out there and I look in there, and sure enough, there's a mouse running around in the bottom of the bag of food.
Wow.
Probably can't get out, right?
No, it can't get out.
Oh man.
So
Wow.
I don't really know what to do about that.
Because
What'd you do? Did you leave it?
I don't want to tell you what I did.
Where there is one, there are
Yeah, I know.
more.
That's what I'm worried about. No,
Uh-huh.
I just left it in the bag. Like, he's still in there. I was like, I got to go to work.
Okay.
Just don't feed the dog. We got to get new food.
You put a little dish of water in there too, right? For the,
You're
for the
telling me
mouse?
you left him in there alive and then went to work.
He can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
Did you put the bag outside?
No, I just left.
You didn't tilt the bag over to let the mouse.
Why? You don't believe me?
I don't believe you.
Well,
I don't
see-
believe you would have done that.
Why? Just leave it there. We'll deal with it when I get home. Just don't touch it. Because he can't get
Just
out.
don't touch the live mouse that can't chew through the bag.
He can't. It's
Okay.
plastic.
He might try. Well, you'll find out.
Yeah.
You might have a dead mouse, and then you have to throw all that food away.
Yeah. Luckily, it's like a 60-pound bag, and there was probably a pound left.
Okay.
So
All right.
he's at the very bottom of the bag.
Tyler, do me a favor. If he's alive, let him out. Let him live. He went through a lot.
Well,
Bring him here.
I've heard things like mice can find their way back home up to 2 miles away or something. Like, if
Right.
I go drop him off at like Fort Benjamin Harrison, he's going to find his way back home.
He will
don't-
be fed to an eagle. Circle of life.
We've been relocating a lot of
Yeah.
mice.
Really?
Yeah, because
Do you have
they
a spot?
what? We have a spot at the far corner of our property, but if it's 2 miles, then they'll find their way back. If that's true.
My favorite mouse story, and after Marcus hears this, he's going to request an edit. But my favorite mouse story is a couple years ago, we had mice in the care center. We had to deal with mice.
He's going to request an edit.
He's going to be like, we need to cut that out.
I'm sorry, Mark.
But we
Yeah.
did deal with it.
Yeah, we dealt with it. It's gone. All the mice are gone or whatever. But before we dealt with it, Jeff Unruh felt like he needed to make a confession,
Oh, yeah.
which was he found a mouse at his house. And he was like, I don't know what to do with it. I know. Grace has some woods and land.
Acreage.
So
I'm
Jeff
gonna,
thinks it's his mouse that.
so
that
I'm going to take my mouse to Grace and is convinced that he started the
did.
mouse infestation.
That's what happened.
you know what? Sure. Yeah, let's let him take that guilt.
So, yeah, I got to figure out what to do. Maybe I thought of that. I was like, maybe I'll just like put it in a bowl or something and I'll bring it to Grace.
To the back 40.
The back.
You
40.
I don't like stuff like this. Like some people are like, cool, mouse, and they grab it and they do
no.
something
Oh,
with
with
it.
their hand?
Or whatever. Like, I don't
They're
know.
grabbing
What?
mice with their hands.
Yeah,
What?
that's-
I don't know what to do. I'm
That's
just
how you
kind of
get
like,
bit by a mouse.
I'm just kind of like, Like, I don't like it. I
Yeah.
looked inside the bag like this. It was like,
Who's better with that stuff, you or Lauren?
oh, Lauren ran away. So at least I looked in the bag. Lauren ran the other direction. So I got to figure out what to do with that mouse. And I'm sure there are others.
Yeah, there are others.
Because it was pretty big.
Ugh, you got to find where they're coming in from.
Ugh.
Yeah. We had mice last year, I want to say.
Oh, really?
Coming in through the attic. So my office is upstairs. It's a office/guest bedroom. And I found like evidence of mice on my desk. On my desk. There's no food in my office. There's nothing to attract them to my office. Can I tell you where the food was? My nature-loving son
In the
wanting
attic.
to feed every bird, on the planet, leaving all of his bird seed and stuff in the garage.
That'll do it.
Oh,
So
so
they-
they came through the garage into the attic?
Yes,
Oh, my
they came through the
goodness.
garage. They found Jaden's little stash. They took little peanuts up with them to the attic, and then they crawled through where like the ductwork was.
Oh, can I tell you the funniest thing? So we knew
Oh,
that
this
there
is
were a
the
couple
worst.
mice around. We knew there were a couple mice around. We didn't know how bad the issue was, but we thought unrelated to that, we started finding chickpeas in our laundry. And it was so baffling. And then at one point I found a little pile of quinoa in the shelf of our little bedroom. We're like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Turns out we had some bags of chickpeas and quinoa like up in the far corner of our pantry that we never looked at, that they had been steadily just taking them one at a time and just like moving them to other places in our house. Mice.
Oh, my
Like
goodness.
to
We've
store
never
for
had
later.
a mouse
And
problem.
they'd go into whatever, if they found some like a basket of laundry, they'd go and they'd put them all in someone's pocket. And then we thought someone was punking us. Like who puts
quinoa punks?
Yeah, why would they put
famous quinoa
chickpeas
pranks
in our pockets? It was so weird. And then it finally dawned on us what was going on. And I looked and I saw, sure enough, they had chewed right through the bag. So anyway, now everything in our pantry is in like Fort Knox lockdown
Yes.
mode. And
Metal containers.
yeah, they're not getting in. So anyway, should we move on?
Yeah, so that's what's new with me. I got to go home and deal with this.
You'll be fine. I believe
Yeah.
in you.
I
The
really
kids are
can't
all
wait.
excited.
Can't wait for the update.
I'm not going to give you an update. I'll just say we dealt with it. All right, guys, we're in a new sermon series, I guess for the rest of time.
It'll be a while.
Called
Okay, but
come
we're,
and go.
we're dipping in and we're dipping
Dipping
out.
in, dipping out.
Yeah.
That's a good way to say
I
it.
don't want people to think we're in one series.
We're
for
not
the
spending a
next
whole year.
Right.
It's not 52 weeks of Matthew. That is true.
Gird your loins.
so we're in the book of Matthew, and we're in a new sermon series called Follow Me. It started on Easter.
Right.
And then you kicked off kind of the start of the series after Easter with Matthew 1, the very beginning of Matthew, which is the start of New Testament.
Right.
So as we do with any series, why Matthew, why now,
Mm-hmm.
and why so much?
Yeah. So, okay, good questions. Why Matthew? I talked a bit about this in my sermon this weekend, but Matthew is, by all accounts that at least all that we know, it is the most read, most copied, most preached from book of the New Testament through all of the early church. There are so many different ancient manuscripts of Matthew. It was a very important early work in the church that, up there with some of the letters of Paul that were just everywhere around the ancient world. And because of that, there's a good reason to ask, okay, why was it such an important book for the early church? And it has to do with some of the unique things that it offers as far as a perspective on the world and how the kingdom of God combats the powers of this world. It is a discipleship manual. It talks about like, what does it actually mean to follow Jesus? And there are just incredible teachings of Jesus that you can't find in the other gospels that just guide us in powerful ways. And frankly, it was an important book to guide the early church through some very confusing theological or sociological issues, like what do we do with all these Gentiles, and how are we supposed to see the coming of Jesus in relation to the story of Israel and all of that stuff. It's just got it all, and so that's why Matthew, because it was important to our spiritual ancestors. I think it should be important to us as well. And there's a lot that we still have to learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
As far as, what was the second question? Why so much? Or
Yeah, why now? Why are we doing
now?
this series
Why
now?
now? Because in the background, like over the last few years, we have been working to kind of revitalize our approach to discipleship here at Grace. What does it mean to follow Jesus? How do we help the people of Grace follow him? And we used to have something that we called Way of Discipleship here at Grace. And if you've been around for a while, you've probably experienced that. But there's a lot of people who've never experienced it. And we feel, as the pastors and leaders of Grace, like there's a really, it's an opportune time to bring back some of the language and the concepts from Way of Discipleship, which were so fruitful in the years past. And so we're kind of working to do that. Matthew is a great sort of, kind of sets the stage in a really great way for us to be having those conversations. And then why so much?
Yeah, why are we doing
just
all
because
of
there's
Matthew?
there's just so much to cover.
Yeah.
And I mean, for example, the Sermon on the Mount
I was just going to say
could
that.
be easily a 30-week sermon series, and I'm not exaggerating. The Bible Project spent about 7 months doing their podcast just on the Sermon on the Mount. We're doing 3 weeks because that's all that we could squeeze in to try to get through Matthew in this time period. So it seems like a lot. It won't feel like a lot. We're already skipping over some really important stuff, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
We're going to get through this way. At least it's a good compromise to be able to actually walk through the book at a steady, deliberate pace, give it really some respect, the amount of time it deserves, while also acknowledging that there's no way we can do it all.
Didn't Tim spend 4 years in the book of Mark?
Something like that.
Yeah. It would be so easy for us to spend, we
3
could times as much time
verse by
talking about
verse,
Matthew.
right.
Yeah.
We could do any of that. So yeah, that's why, and that's the thinking behind it. And what I'm hopeful that people of Grace will experience in this is, as we come back to this, usually happens when we do sermon series, but now that we're going to come back to it multiple times, I'm hopeful that as we go through this book, as we walk through these themes, there will be certain sort of hooks or concepts that will kind of anchor themselves in people's thinking when they come to the book of Matthew. Just like with Philippians, we spent 7 weeks in Philippians. I hope, even though some of the details are going to fade, I hope for most people when they read Philippians, they'll remember Paul in prison, his first visit, the love that he had for them. Like those are some things that are now hopefully will come to their mind when they're reading Philippians. And again, we're all about equipping people to read and study Scripture on their own, and this is one of the ways that we can do it. So we'll walk through Matthew, and I'm really excited for all of it. And just in case you weren't there for the sermon, or for this weekend, basically there's 4 kind of mini series as a part of the big series. This spring, first 10 chapters or so, and then in the fall we'll come back and do another 10 chapters. And then in December, we're going to go back to Matthew chapter 2 and talk about the Magi. That's the Christmas series. And then in the spring of next year, we are going to do chapters 21 through 28, and we're going to end with Easter.
Eager to navigate the fun.
So that's the basic game plan, and
Okay.
I
it's
think
going to
that
be
was
great.
the first time I've heard you from the pulpit kind of spell out the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, here's the whole next year,
Yep.
Right?
essentially.
And it was
right?
even on the screen. We got a title. We got a slide.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
got a slide, you got it all. I figured, why not? We got it already figured out. Why not share it with people?
Yeah.
So I hope people get excited and don't get roll their eyes and get bored with it. But how could you get bored with Matthew? It's so great. There's so much to dig into.
So for this sermon, what was kind of the big idea? Were you kind of like, I have never heard a sermon about the lineage in genealogy, so I'm gonna do a
I
sermon
feel like
on
you
it.
had a lot of work to do because you had to establish the series.
Right.
You had to establish the book,
Right.
and then you had to talk about chapter 1,
Exactly.
which is
It was kinda
the
like-
genealogy.
It was kind of like 2 sermons in one.
Yeah.
And the genealogy was a great illustration of one of the main points of my first part of the message, talking about fulfillment, which we can get into.
Mhm.
But yeah, the first part of the message is all me trying to just raise the stakes a little bit. I was hopeful that it was kind of a meaningful intro to consider the fact that many somebodies gave their lives to defend books like Matthew.
Yeah, that was wild. I had no idea.
Do you know?
about that.
Yeah, do you know about that?
that was a cool intro.
Well, I wanted to be thought I'd be a little dramatic, but
Provocative.
well, yeah. And I definitely used some artistic license. We don't know many of the details, but I had to share this because I completely forgot to bring this into the app notes or even into my message. But it was such an important turning point in the church that this persecution, that there was this entire controversy that started 10 years later, called the Donatist controversy, where there was a big debate in the church because bishops or church leaders who basically gave up their holy books instead of dying, after the persecution was over, they wanted to become bishops again. They wanted to keep leading the church. And others were like, no, you gave up the holy books. You didn't
sell out.
You were a sellout. Yeah. And so they said, no, you can't be a bishop anymore. And so there was this whole controversy that developed in the church. And so in the middle of that controversy, this is my fun fact, in the middle of that controversy, they developed a word to describe these people who gave up the holy books, who handed them over. And the word in Latin was traditor, which is the origin of our words, both traitor and treason.
Whoa.
That's where we get those words from, traditor, one who handed over. That's what the word means. And so I just find that fascinating.
Firstborn child of the devil.
Maybe, according to some people on one side. Others would say no, that God's grace is enough, and here we are. But anyway, this we could go on and talk about all that. But that, to me, I wanted to raise the stakes and think about like our spiritual ancestors. Some of our spiritual ancestors actually died to make sure that we would have this book in our hands. And to us, it's like, why would anyone die for a book? There's millions of copies, but this was like so important. They considered it worth giving their life for. And that, to me, raises the stakes on why we want to read something like this.
Yeah. So I don't know too many Bible studies or like devotionals that dig deep into the first part of Matthew, the first chapter. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to draw from verse 9.
Right.
Uzziah was the father of Jotham.
Yeah. Amen.
You got to know about Uzziah.
Right.
You got to know what he did.
It's a tough sell in the past to my non-Christian friends where I'm like, yeah, great. You want to get into the Bible? Cool. Let's start with
Matthew.
Start with the New Testament. You'll learn about Jesus in the Gospels. First Gospel, Matthew, go. And they're like, there's 300 words of names.
Yeah.
So why do you think Matthew, because you said we don't know who wrote this, but we think it's
Matthew,
the disciple.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think he believed this was the best possible opening to the story of Jesus? Do you think he never heard of the hero's journey, first step, like an adventure awaits, or whatever?
We should have started
the whole New
with
this way.
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, he didn't know he was opening the New Testament. He was just writing the story of Jesus, to be clear.
Yeah.
But I would say the answer to that question has a lot to do with who he was writing to and why he was writing what he was writing. And I talk about this in part 1 of the message as well, talking about the possible audience of Christians in a city like Antioch, where there was just this chaos of Gentiles coming in and synagogue communities kicking people out, and persecution starting to spring up, and confusion about how are we supposed to live, and how are we supposed to handle all this church stuff, and so to answer much of that, Matthew intentionally leans heavily into this theme of fulfillment. He really, really wants to make the point clear that Jesus is the fulfillment of Israel's story. This is not some new religion. This is not some big right turn that God is taking. This is an absolute through line from Genesis all the way till now. So Christians in Antioch or wherever, what you are experiencing in the Spirit moving through the body of Christ, and even including the Gentiles, all of this is exactly what God planned from the beginning, and we see that through the person of Jesus. So that's what he's trying to get across, fulfillment. And there's other themes like the Kingdom Manifesto, the discipleship manual that are other. We'll come back to those in significant ways, but for this opener of his gospel, he's really trying to tie into the message of fulfillment, and specifically by demonstrating 2 things. One, that Jesus is a direct descendant of Abraham and of King David, 2 key figures in the sort of narrative of redemption of the Old Testament. And he wants to point out the fact that this story has order to it. He uses these 14 generations, 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the Babylonian exile, and 14 from the exile to Christ. And he wants to point out there's order to this. And scholars debate, is that 14 meaning 7777777,
yeah.
and 7 is like completion, but then it's like the 7th 7 begins with Christ. I don't know, maybe, but the main key is that there's like 3 elements to his story, and the 4th chapter begins with Jesus.
So when ancient readers were reading this, were they like, oh, Ram was the father of Amminadab,
I think,
or Naasson was the father of Salmon?
Maybe.
Like, was it like a drum roll? Like they was like.
Yeah.
Would they
line
have
by
known
line, like
all the names?
yeah. Would
Well,
they,
that's
would they
so-
know this? And as soon as they get to I don't know, the Azor or something, they like I see where we're going with this. Like, is it like exciting for them? Would it have been really like riveting for them?
Well, it depends. I don't think Gentiles who just came into the church would have had any idea about a lot of these names.
oh, so it's kind of to educate them.
Well, perhaps, yes. But the first 2 14s, so from Abraham through to the exile, you can find those names in that order in 1 Chronicles 2.
I was going to say, there are genealogies
Yes.
listed elsewhere.
And so it's obvious that Matthew was utilizing Chronicles as his source for those parts of the genealogy. We don't know what his source was for the 3rd part of the genealogy, but that would have been the part for the Jewish believers. That would have been the part that they would have leaned forward a little bit to say, oh, we're actually going to get all the way to Jesus. Like, that would have been interesting to them. The first 2 14s, they would have been like, yeah, we know, because we read that in our Hebrew Bible. But then that last third is like, okay, I can see how we got from the exile to Christ, and you can see how the line is unbroken. Now, it's interesting because if you read Luke's genealogy of Jesus, it's different. And he's choosing a different path. But the thing that what Matthew's clearly doing is he is charting a course through the kingly line of Israel. Think like Aragorn, son of Arathorn, like in Lord of the Rings. It goes all the way back to Isildur. Like that's an important thing. It gives legitimacy to Jesus. There we go. It gives legitimacy to Jesus as the actual heir to the throne of Israel.
That was a really great example, because I feel like the Gentile in what you just said. I have no idea what you're talking about, but the two of you are really excited to talk Lord of the Rings lore.
Absolutely. So and that's
you know exactly what we're talking
My
about.
son knows. I do not know.
And I bet, I mean, like taking Lord of the Rings out of it for a second, I bet even a Gentile who had any interactions with the Hebrews, Jewish people or Judeans, would have at least heard of King Solomon or King David, because that was like. Those were like the major heroes of the faith for the Israelite people. They would have talked about them, and they loved the fact that they used to have this big, basically empire in the center of Judea. Like, they would have talked about that. I don't think they would have necessarily known all the other specific names. But
every time I read this part of the Bible, I'm like, man, I barely know the names of my great-grandfather.
Right.
Barely. Like, I had to ask my dad, what's the name of my great-great-grandfather? Like, that's as far back as I could go. Jephthah Troyer. And he doesn't even know the others. Like, he was like, I can ask my brothers, but I don't know. So, like, how far back do you guys know or remember your ancestors?
A couple of my family members have done a little bit of work on this, and so I have like little glimpses. I know up to my great-grandparents, I think all of them. And then there are a couple specific people farther back in the story that I know. There's one notable guy that lived in like central Pennsylvania. What was it? Mickelduff was his last name. And I know a little bit of his story because he had some notable life events, and so I know a bit about him. I think I'm related to Christopher Columbus's brother.
Whoa.
Yeah. So anyway, so I know a couple of those things, but I don't. Yeah, just like you, after you get back a couple generations, it's kind of like, I don't know. The thread gets a little lost. What about you?
Well, I know it's particularly important to the African American side of my family. We have some on that side of the family who are kind of like the keeper of the family tree and the family history and all of that. On my grandfather's side, we could trace our lineage back to like the tree stump where my ancestor was freed from slavery. This summer, I have an opportunity to go to a family reunion in Tennessee on my grandmother's side. this is the 99-year-old grandmother who plans to make the trip from Chicago to Tennessee. So I told my husband, under no circumstances are we not attending this family reunion, and we're bringing the kids, and they're going to learn everything we can about the matriarch of our family. So, which is really interesting because, you know, I'm a biracial person, and it seems like family lineage, as far as my lived experience, has been way more important to the African-American side of my family than to the other side of my family.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish it mattered more.
Yeah.
Because I know nothing about past my grandparents. I don't really know.
Yeah. It's a symptom of probably of the fact that we all move around a lot and lose our root. We don't have roots to places like a lot of other cultures do, and because we are so individualistic, like we don't generally as a society care that much, where it's like we're here, that's all that really matters, you know. But even, I mean, other cultures I've been, they'll be able to tell you about their ancestors going back many generations, or at least their family with some notable kind of heroes, but they'll go back a long while. And in Israel, actually in Judea, there's evidence in some of the writings of Josephus that King Herod, because he had very dubious Israelite ancestry at all. He was like Idumean. He was not even like barely Israelite. And so he's king of the Jews, but didn't really deserve to be. And so he actually went out of his way to try to destroy all of the genealogies that were out there for the kings, the line of the kings. So he obviously wasn't successful because we have other records of that. But that was obviously, for them to have kept those, that would have been an important thing. And even in European cultures, a lot of places will have records in their church registries of births and deaths going back hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's also complicated by broken families.
Yes.
When I think of my family on both sides, there's been so much divorce and remarriage. I wouldn't even know how to draw that tree. I don't know what that looks like.
Right.
And I think that's just created a complication culture-wide that makes it difficult for us to really trace our roots.
And it's so fascinating too, because there's so many dead ends if you try to follow in a line back. Like my mom's maiden name is Porch, and the working theory is that a few generations earlier, one of my ancestors was a porch baby. It was an abandoned baby left on the porch of a church that got adopted, and was just called Porch, which is kind of cruel if that's...
Okay, I will say the cool thing is, well, to some it's cool, to some it's not, but the genealogy tests that you can do has been like uncovering a lot of things like that.
Absolutely.
And helping people rediscover their heritage or their lineage for better or for worse.
Right.
I have an older sister who we found out through DNA tests isn't like related to us biologically.
Interesting.
And that was,
hopefully she's not a friend of the pod. Just
a tough blow. No, she's not a friend of the pod. But also the last name Gaffron. We're not really Gaffrons.
Oh, wow.
If you trace the bloodline through DNA, there's like, it's telling a story.
Yeah.
Goes back generations.
So what are you?
But it's telling a story.
Wow.
My husband's family, turns out, is of Polish descent.
Whoa. Fascinating.
Whoa.
Surprise!
Yeah, total surprise.
So, yeah, I like when I'm reading through all these names, one thing you pointed out just here is that it kind of goes through the king's lineage, or however.
Right. That's how Matthew does it. Yeah.
But it also goes through like the failures and the scandals and the exiles of Israel's story. And once you start explaining in your sermon, it's pointing out all the good and the bad of Israel's story, but God's promise went through all of it. And I thought that was interesting. I thought it was also, it made me think of like, okay, if someone were to keep writing that, like just keep for generations and generations, it's good for us to hold on to as like when we feel like the modern church is hemorrhaging or losing influence or we're not unified and credible, like we're losing our credibility because Matthew kept, for the good and the bad, here's all the generations, and it goes through Jesus and it goes to us and all that stuff. But it was interesting for me to think about, like, if that list were to keep going, for good and for better, for worse, all the names that would would show up on that. And it was also interesting to me in a world where our attention spans are minimal. Like this is like 40 generations for a promise to be fulfilled by God. 40 generations.
Right.
And I can't even go back 4.
Right.
You know, so like in a time now in 2025 where we can't even keep our attention on something for any amount of time that's worth it. To think God's promises were fulfilled within 40 generation time span. You're like, man,
Right.
Like I don't know how to put that into words other than 39 of those generations were hoping for something and didn't see it.
Right.
That's insane. That is an insane amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it really does. It does give us a whole different perspective on our faith when we zoom out like that and take the grand view, which is why I find it so fascinating to do what Matthew does all the time, which is to talk about the grand storyline. He doesn't just talk about Jesus. Like you'd think a gospel of Jesus must be like a biography just about him, but it's not. It's about the story of God's faithfulness over and over again. And Jesus just happens to be the fulfillment of that story, which then launches the next chapter. And I mean, it's been another set of 14 generations and 14 generations, and it just has kept going.
Yeah. The inclusion of the women, you made sure to point this out. Was that uncommon for genealogies at that time to include women?
When I was first finding this interesting years ago, the things I was reading said, yes, this was wildly uncommon. I have since come to realize that no, it wasn't necessarily wildly uncommon. However, the women that Matthew chooses to highlight are not the type of women that would normally show up in genealogies. So like if you're reading about the Caesars or something like that, you're gonna see the names of the wives of the Caesars, the mothers of the Caesars, like they're all part of the story. Same with the Persian kings. Like the women are not absent from the history. But these are prominent, influential, extremely elite women. The ones we're looking at in Matthew, all 4 of them, in one way or another, are outcast, downtrodden, taken advantage of. They are outsiders. They're all Gentiles in the middle of a Judean story. So, yeah, there's a lot that we could dig into there, but these are not the type of women that would normally show up in a genealogy of someone that you wanted to paint a positive picture of.
So again, I think about that. Like if the list were to keep going through all the generations, like who are the outcasts throughout history that would have been included in this list of kings and, and what are the names and the stories of the marginalized and vulnerable that we'd recognize and be surprised that they show up on a list like this?
Right.
Who would have done that throughout history? And once you start thinking about that, it gets pretty interesting.
You.
I would have shown up.
Clearly, you would have been there. Yeah, me.
Me.
Yeah.
I think we'd be surprised.
Yeah.
See our names on that list. No, I'm just thumbing through the genealogy and chronicles, and you're not seeing a lot of women.
Yeah, right.
In these genealogies.
They're more the exception than the rule for sure. What I will say is I didn't really talk about who these women were in the message. It's worth taking a second just to talk about them. And I let's see if I get the order right. The first one is Ruth, correct? Ruth, we did a whole sermon series on her. Was that last year? Was that 2 years ago? Basically, the
first one was Tamar.
Oh, Tamar, that's right. Of course, she's in Genesis. Tamar is like basically a pawn in this like succession situation where she ends up either choosing to or being forced to sleep with her father-in-law, getting pregnant by him so that she can, I don't know, get herself back into the good graces of her family or something like that. Like,
we actually just barely touched on her in the Joseph series.
Oh yeah, you're right. Well, anyway, she was not, I mean, either she is this exploited outcast woman or she is she's someone with sexual morals that we wouldn't agree with, but either way, why would she show up in a genealogy of someone that we want to say is the king? She's an important,
kind of lauded for protecting the family line.
Right.
Right. Even if what she did was deceptive,
sure.
She knew that she was entitled to heirs and preserving the family line.
Right. And then I suppose Rahab would be next.
Yeah,
Rahab's next because she was a Canaanite prostitute and helped the Israelites come into the promised land. And so, I mean, there you go. She's a prostitute. She's not considered part of the upper crust of society. She's an outcast, and she's not Israelite. And then we have Ruth, which we did the series on, and she was a Moabite woman. She's kind of like straight as an arrow, pretty laudable as like a hero of the faith, but she was very vulnerable, very much an outcast.
She did uncover his feet.
She uncovered his feet, which there's a possibility that was a euphemism, but regardless. And then Bathsheba is the one that King David takes advantage of to, because he wants to, and then he gets her husband killed, the Hittite soldier of his, and so anyway, all four of them. Their stories are filled with pain and difficulty and exclusion and being taken advantage of, and
they're right next to the names of all the kings and
right.
Exactly.
So would this have been a surprise? Like back to the question, Tyler, that you asked earlier about, would people be on the edge of their seats to see the name, Uzziah?
Right.
Would they have been like Rahab? Like,
right.
Would that have been a surprise to the original audience?
Soundbite.
Hush.
I imagine. I don't know, but I imagine that when the first name is read, people have been like, "Oh, that's a choice. I guess you're right. Tamar was their mom." Anyway, keep going, and then and then Rahab, that Rahab, and then it's Ruth. Oh yeah, well Ruth, we like her, but and then Bathsheba, it's like true, but then you start seeing all the connections and thinking, whoa, and then there's actually a fifth woman in this genealogy. It's Mary, Mary, who is this basically low-class peasant girl who has absolutely no like status to speak of.
A total unknown.
Total unknown, yeah. So anyway, we could make a huge mountain out of a molehill, but the basic idea is that again, Matthew's trying to convey the idea that Jesus is fulfilling a story of God's redemption, and that story of redemption includes the Gentiles. It includes the outcasts. It includes those that otherwise polite society would like to forget.
So now in my biblical imagination, I want to compare this with Luke's genealogy.
Yeah.
And see like what path did he take?
Right.
Who did he mention? How do these genealogies compare to one another? What do they have in common?
Right.
Like, that's where my mind goes.
Yeah. It'd be really fascinating. And there's people bend themselves in knots trying to explain how one of those genealogies is actually Mary's genealogy and the other one is Joseph's genealogy, but I don't think that that's worth it. They both point to Joseph. So it's...
notable absence, Joseph.
Notably absent from
the genealogy.
Matthew's genealogy?
Well, because David's not a descendant of Joseph.
Just like you look for your favorite Bible characters in this genealogy, and Joseph not there.
Not there.
Right. Judah was there.
Yeah, because King David is of the tribe of Judah.
Yeah. You said Matthew focuses heavily on the theme of fulfillment. Do you think this focus, as opposed to just like Jesus is the new beginning, the new Genesis, the new, like this is a new chapter, do you think the focus of like it's that, but it's also fulfilling these 40-generation-old promises, do you think that's the reason why people were dying for this? Because like I could see Matthew or someone being like, this is it. This is the new beginning. Everything else, God's faithful right now, and he's delivering us the Messiah, and this is what we need to focus on. But it's that plus a fulfillment of everything that's come before. And I feel like that part is the reason why people would have chosen to die for it.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I think what this fulfillment theme does is you're right. It's not just saying, hey, here's the new latest trend. Here's the latest religion out of the Fertile Crescent, everybody. Yeah. Like it was,
or even like it's real, but like this is it's like
we're starting.
We've had so many failures and scandals and exiles. Like let's turn the page, and this is our Messiah, and you know this is new creation that God's been telling us about.
Right.
It's not just that; it's all the fulfillment stuff too.
Right. I think that is part of what makes this such a spectacular book and made it such a spectacular book for the early church. I mean, I could imagine if I was a teacher, I even mused on this in the fun facts, but if I was a teacher in the first century and I'm in a church that's full of a bunch of Gentiles and I wanted to try to explain Jesus the way that I understand who Jesus is, I would be spending a lot of time teaching the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew helps me do that in an amazing way. Like, you want to talk about the Exodus? You look all through Matthew, what do you see? You see Jesus going down to Egypt, coming back from Egypt. You see him being baptized in the waters of the Jordan, crossing the waters just like the waters of the Red Sea, and also entering the Promised Land through the waters of the Jordan just like the Israelites did. You see him being tempted in the wilderness where the Israelites were tempted in the wilderness. Like it I could go on and on and on. There's a new Passover. It's all over the place. And so this book would help me to connect the dots to say, this isn't a new story. This is the story. It's the original story of God's redemption. He's been working since long before Rome came on the scene, since before the Babylonians. He's been working since before anything that you know. He's been working to bring about the exact thing that he brought about through Jesus. So that would be, for me, it would be a really exhilarating tool, this book, to help teach a broader story, which is, of course, what I'm doing today. Not just today. I mean, in my pastoring, like I'm constantly talking about the grander narrative. So I feel a significant kinship with Matthew and those other teachers trying to figure out how to help Gentiles understand their place in this big story.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would have died for it.
Well, yeah, that's going to be my next question. Like, one word. What's one word Bishop Felix would say if he could see how we treat Scripture compared to choosing to die for it? What's one word?
Scubalon.
Probably mournful.
Yeah.
Woeful.
Well, he'd probably be
Garbage.
absolutely flabbergasted. That everybody can read and that everybody has access to multiple Bibles in their house. Like that would have probably bowled him over beyond anything. And yes, I think for him to then see how cheaply we think of it and how little we spend our time meditating on it when he dedicated his life to it. I mean,
and how many translations there are.
Yeah.
He died for this thing, and we skip over the first chapter or whatever because it's just
boring
names.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else is there to talk about with the genealogy? What else do you want to
What
make
did
sure
you
we
have to
know?
leave on the cutting room floor for time?
I
Because
think-
as you said, this was like 3 sermons in one.
Well, sure. I think more of the stuff that I would have liked to have explored more had to do with the world behind the text and talking a bit more about the threads that we are going to have to pick apart, like I just mentioned with the Exodus and with the new Passover and just there's so many biblical undercurrents from the Hebrew Bible that go through Matthew. I wish I could. I gave one example of Mount Sinai and the Sermon on the Mount and how those two kind of map onto each other, and that was all I had time for in the message. I would have loved to give 40 examples, but we'll just have to spend the next year doing that. We'll go through it, and I mean, Amy's going to get a chance to do that this coming weekend as she talks about the baptism of Jesus and John the Baptist, and then the following weekend I get to talk about Jesus being tempted in the wilderness, which goes right back to the Israelites being tempted in the wilderness and how'd they do and how did he do. We'll have to find out, or you can just read ahead.
So Amy's on this coming weekend.
Yeah.
All right. Gotta invite her to the pod. I'm sure she'll.
She's down.
She'd love to come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to Jesus' baptism next.
Yep. And this baptism's in service this weekend.
That's right. Yeah.
It'll be great. Yeah.
Cool.
The only other thing, I mentioned it in my message just as an aside, but I am leaving tomorrow morning early to go out to the Disabilities and the Church Conference in Washington, D.C. It's hosted by Key Ministry, and we went last year. I went with Laura Mitchell, who heads our disability ministry, and Milton Keys, and the three of us went out there for the first time, and we really just, it was a great experience, and it was amazing to connect with so many other people that care about that. And so I applied to see if they'd consider me speaking about the ancient context of disabilities and how that influences our reading of the healing miracles of Jesus. And they said, sure. So then I dove in and spent a bunch of time doing a bunch of research about everything I could get my hands on about disabilities in the ancient world. And so I have about an hour and a half of content that I have trimmed down to the 45 minutes I'm allotted. And so I have chosen, I'm going to come back. And then in June, right after the sermon in Matthew, where I talk about Jesus healing the blind and the lame, I will then do a standalone class on a Monday night where I'll do the full unabridged edition for anyone who's interested, and I promise it's interesting stuff.
That's
like it
so
is
cool.
so cool, the amount of stuff that I was able to dig up. So
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear how that goes.
Yeah, I can't wait to get that communications request and that RMS request for that.
It's on the way. It's on my to-do list. It's on my to-do list.
Nobody knows what you're talking about.
Internal internal systems joke.
It's my favorite kind of humor. All right, so we'll do that. And Amy will be with us next week. Are you going to be back for next week? Or are you going to be?
I'll be here.
Okay. All right, good. All right. Marin, will you please send us out?
Sure. Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
And we'll see you on the other side of Sunday.